Moskowitz stepped up and demanded answers about the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files and Pam Bondi, and the mood in the room instantly shifted. From the first words out of his mouth, it felt like everything was about to boil over. There was a tension no one wanted to name, but everyone could feel it hanging in the air. Even viewers at home could sense it, that moment where you lean closer because something clearly isn't right. And within moments, the exchange became so confusing, so uncomfortable, that it was obvious this hearing was heading somewhere unusual. He started laying out the timeline, piece by piece, almost like reading a case file aloud. Hearings scheduled weeks away. Votes happening now. No clarity. No answers. Then came the moment that raised eyebrows everywhere. Pam Bondi hands binders labeled Part 1 of the Epstein files to Republican influencers. Influencers, not Congress, not investigators, not oversight committees, influencers. The visuals spread everywhere. Then Bondi publicly says the Epstein list is sitting on her desk. Shortly after that, the Department of Justice releases a memo saying there is no list. No list at all? So which is it? A list on the desk, or no list in existence? And somehow, this committee never held a single hearing to explain how any of that happened. Moskowitz pointed out how strange that silence was. No questions. No investigation. Just moving on. He tried to push further, but was told, not now, maybe later, we can talk soon. Just not yet. And that's when the situation got even stranger. The president suddenly calls the entire Epstein issue a hoax. He attacks his own supporters. He blames Barack Obama, someone who hasn't been president in years. Then Republicans vote against releasing the files in committee. After backlash from their own base, they refuse to return to committee. Congress leaves early. The pressure builds. Then comes another twist. The administration sends the Deputy Attorney General to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell in prison. That same official happens to be the president's former personal attorney. Soon after the meeting, Maxwell makes comments favorable to the president. Not long after that, she's transferred to a minimum security facility. Then the president publicly starts talking about his power to pardon her. Around the same time, leaks to the Wall Street Journal suddenly stop. When Congress returns, there's the Massey discharge petition. Comer releases a document dump, but nearly all of it is already public. Moskowitz asks the obvious question. If these documents existed, why weren't they released weeks ago? Why wait until the exact day of the vote? Then Republicans introduce a non-binding resolution designed to block the Massey petition. And finally, the White House declares that passing a discharge petition to release the Epstein files would be considered a hostile act. Moskowitz pauses and lets it sink in. A hostile act to release files? Files related to one of the most notorious criminal cases in modern history. He calls it what it looks like: distraction, deflection, and misinformation layered on top of each other. And after laying out this entire sequence, the most shocking part becomes clear. Despite all of it, despite the contradictions, the reversals, the secrecy, this committee has asked almost no questions about how any of this unfolded inside the Department of Justice. But the question kept coming back, sharper every time. Why? Why is so much political energy being spent to keep this list from ever seeing the light of day? Why does even asking about it seem to make people uncomfortable? Moskowitz didn't dance around it. He asked directly, should the list come out? Should the public know who had dealings with Jeffrey Epstein? Should people in power be held accountable if they were involved? The response he got only made things stranger. He was told this wasn't the right hearing. This was about free speech, not process. But Moskowitz wasn't buying that explanation. He pointed out the obvious contradiction. If victims were sexually abused, potentially by powerful individuals, then transparency isn't a side issue. It's the issue. And yet, no one could even say whether the president was on the list or not. No one could say whether members of Congress were on it. No one could say anything with certainty because the list itself remained hidden. Moskowitz wasn't accusing anyone outright. He was careful about that. But he made it clear that the behavior surrounding this issue was deeply unusual. The shifting explanations, the sudden denials, the constant delays. He asked again, calmly but firmly, whether people in positions of power should be held accountable for crimes against victims. Should the list be released so the truth can be known? Instead of an answer, he was met with deflection, offers to discuss it in another hearing, attempts to redirect the conversation. Even awkward jokes meant to lighten the moment, which only made it more uncomfortable. At one point, someone tried to remind him that the president had already called for the release of the Epstein files. Moskowitz didn't let that slide. Calling for release and actually releasing the files are not the same thing. If the files exist, why haven't they been fully disclosed? If transparency is the goal, why all the hesitation? Why the resistance? Then Moskowitz widened the lens. This committee has jurisdiction over the Department of Justice. So why, he asked, has this situation been allowed to drag on for months without real oversight? Why has Comer effectively controlled the narrative while key questions remain unanswered? He reminded everyone that weeks earlier, promises were made. The FBI director would testify. The Attorney General would testify. And now those appearances were still weeks away, while the controversy continued to grow. And just as the tension reached its peak, something even stranger happened. A witness announced he had to leave early. No clear reason. No emergency cited. Just a calm statement that he was heading out? Moskowitz immediately noticed. His expression changed. He asked where the witness was going, expecting at least a routine explanation. What followed, instead, was a bizarre exchange. The witness refused to say. It wasn't lunch. It wasn't clear. He hinted at something important, maybe even a meeting with the president, but wouldn't confirm anything. The evasiveness was impossible to ignore. A witness brought in for a high-stakes hearing suddenly leaving, offering no explanation and clearly uncomfortable answering simple questions. The room felt it. Viewers felt it. And Moskowitz definitely felt it. Because moments like that don't just raise eyebrows. They raise alarms. There was something deeply unsettling about how vague the witness was, and that alone would have been enough to make the moment uncomfortable. But the real turning point came when Moskowitz finally said the one thing no one in the room wanted to hear out loud. The Epstein file. As soon as he mentioned it, the atmosphere shifted. He asked whether the witness was aware of what had been happening around the Epstein documents. The witness tried to stay neutral, carefully distancing himself, avoiding details, and choosing words that revealed as little as possible. But Moskowitz wasn't willing to let it end there. Because what's been unfolding in Washington isn't just a heated argument or a typical political dispute. It's been a 9-month saga filled with delays, contradictions, confusing public statements, leaked materials, and a Department of Justice that appears unable or unwilling to clearly explain its own actions. And Moskowitz laid it all out in a way that forced everyone to confront the full timeline at once. Month after month passed. Hearing after hearing came and went, and yet the committee still hadn't been allowed to question the people who mattered most. No testimony from the Attorney General, no direct briefing from the Department of Justice, no clear explanation about one of the most explosive cases involving powerful individuals in recent memory. Just silence, postponements, and vague promises that answers would come later. Then Moskowitz went back to the moment that ignited the entire controversy. The binder. A binder labeled Part 1 of the Epstein files. But instead of being delivered to Congress or provided to investigators, it was handed out to partisan influencers. People outside the official process. People on social media. That alone raised serious concerns. But what followed made the situation even stranger. Shortly after the binder appeared, the Attorney General herself publicly stated that the Epstein list was on my desk. Those words spread instantly and sparked outrage, curiosity, and demands for transparency. People wanted to know who was on the list and why it hadn't been released. Then came the shock. The Department of Justice issued a memo saying there was no list at all. Not that it was classified. Not that it was under review. Not that it couldn't yet be released, but that it simply did not exist. That contradiction was impossible to ignore. So which statement was true? Was the Attorney General exaggerating? Was she referring to something else entirely? Or did someone inside the department panic and try to undo a statement that was never supposed to go public? That growing swirl of mixed messages made the entire situation feel less like a coordinated government response and more like a series of frantic attempts to keep up with whoever spoke last. And Moskowitz made it clear this wasn't just about one mistake or one confusing comment. He pointed to a pattern. A real, visible pattern that anyone following the story closely could see forming long before this hearing. Every time the public seemed to get closer to real answers, something changed. A new excuse appeared. A procedural move blocked progress. A new statement contradicted the previous one. And all of it led to a question no one wanted to ask directly. Was this confusion the result of disorganization, or was it intentional? As Moskowitz continued, the discomfort in the room became obvious. Members shifted in their seats, because now he wasn't just talking about the Department of Justice. He was talking about Congress itself. He reminded everyone that when lawmakers had the opportunity to force the release of the files, some of them voted against it. The reaction from the public was immediate and intense. Even their own supporters were furious, accusing them of protecting powerful people instead of standing with victims and demanding truth. And then, after the backlash, those same lawmakers refused to reconvene the committee. Congress left early for recess. From the outside, it didn't look like coincidence. It looked like panic, like someone had pressed a button to stop the momentum before it went any further, and whether that perception is accurate or not, the damage it caused was undeniable. Trust doesn't need proof to collapse. Suspicion alone is enough. And Moskowitz knew that, which is why he shifted gears again and raised another issue that still hasn't been properly explained. He pointed to the meeting between the Deputy Attorney General and Ghislaine Maxwell inside her prison. A meeting that took place shortly after Maxwell made public remarks that reflected favorably on the administration. Then, not long after that, she was transferred to a minimum security facility. Moskowitz didn't call it a conspiracy. He didn't accuse anyone outright. He simply laid out the timeline, because the timeline itself raises questions. These are documented events, and when they happen in this order, people are naturally going to wonder what's really going on behind closed doors. Moskowitz acknowledged what many people online have been saying. There are rumors. There is speculation. Some believe there may be efforts to keep certain information contained or to ensure certain testimony doesn't change. None of that has been proven. But what can't be denied is that the timing looks unusual. And in cases involving this level of power, secrecy, and public interest, unusual timing fuels distrust. And just when it seemed like he had said everything that needed to be said, Moskowitz added yet another layer. After months of confusion, after weeks of deflection, and after a long trail of contradictory statements, the White House issued a statement calling the push to release the Epstein files a hostile act. That phrase landed hard. A hostile act to release documents connected to one of the most notorious abusers in modern history. A hostile act to disclose who may have been associated with someone whose crimes devastated victims for decades. No matter where you fall politically, that wording feels off. It doesn't sound like language meant to protect survivors. It sounds like language meant to protect systems, reputations, and institutions. And that's exactly the point Moskowitz forced into the open. When transparency itself is framed as an attack, something fundamental has gone wrong, but even then he wasn't finished. He turned to the so-called document dump, the large release that was supposed to calm public outrage and demonstrate cooperation. Instead, it did the opposite. Because nearly all of it, about 97%, had already been public for years. There was very little new information. It looked less like transparency and more like a performance. A way to say, we released documents, without actually revealing anything meaningful, and that led to another unavoidable question. Why release them then? If the committee chair had access to those documents for weeks, Why wait until the exact day the issue was coming to a head? Was it simple delay, or was it strategic timing meant to blunt criticism and derail momentum? Moskowitz didn't give an answer. He didn't need to. The timeline spoke loudly enough on its own. Then he brought everything back to the core issue, the one that cuts through every political maneuver, every procedural dodge, and every carefully worded statement. The victims. Real people. Survivors who were exploited, manipulated, and abused. People who were told that cooperating with authorities would lead to accountability. People who waited years believing that the truth would eventually come out. Every delay pushes those survivors further away from closure. Every contradiction weakens their faith in the system. Every sudden pivot tells them their pain is secondary to political convenience. And that was the part no one in the room seemed eager to confront, because it's the hardest part to defend. If the list truly doesn't exist, then victims deserve a clear, honest explanation. If it does exist but cannot be released, then victims deserve a transparent legal justification, not shifting narratives and mixed messages. And if powerful individuals are actively working to prevent exposure, then the public deserves accountability. Moskowitz didn't claim to know which version of the story is true. He didn't accuse specific names or assert hidden motives as fact. What he did was highlight something impossible to ignore. The behavior surrounding this case is strange. And when powerful institutions start acting strangely around an issue involving vulnerable victims, people are right to ask questions. Us paying attention, asking the hard questions and refusing to accept vague answers. Every click, every share, every conversation helps keep the pressure on institutions that might otherwise hide behind bureaucracy and delay. This hearing wasn't just about one binder, one list, or one witness. It was about exposing patterns, highlighting accountability gaps, and reminding the public that silence is never neutral when lives and justice are at stake. Transparency isn't optional, and neither is holding those in power responsible. Stay engaged, stay critical, and demand that the stories survivors deserve to see fully revealed are brought to light.